So, in this podcast, in this segment, we're going to talk about The Coming Age by Jacques Barazon. Um, Let me give you a little background of Jacques Barazon. He was a cultural critic and intellectual in France, and he wrote a large work called From Dawn to Decadence, 1500 to the Present, 500 Years of Western Cultural Life. And this selection is considered to be an epilogue. It's at the end of this work. So let me read you this background information down here. Dealing with the period from the Protestant Reformation to contemporary times, he posits a pattern of cultural evolution in which decadence marks the end of historical periods, providing the energies that create and motivate the future. Drawn from the monumental work, the following selection is from the final chapter of the book and is a hypothetical prediction of what the world will look like in the year 2300. Given the conditions that exist today. So when we think about this essay, we're being asked to imagine the future, and that is in the year 2300, which is um, only it's a couple nearly 2 centuries or 3 centuries away, right? We're only in 2020 now. But in this essay, he's asking us to think about a period of time that is has not yet occurred, but yet at the same time we can see that the population, according to Jacques Barazon, was divided into when you think about the future, what have you ever wondered what the future would look like 100 years from now or 200 years from now? This essay is a good example of what could happen in the future, if not already. That's already happening, considering everything that's going on now and today in the world. So in this time period, the population was divided roughly into two groups. They were the people, the techni, the master and who mastered the methods of physical science, especially mathematics. It was to them that what Latin had been to the medieval clergy. So the groups that make up the population of the Western, or the first group was comprised of men and women who possessed the aptitude and the know-how to understand methods of physical science, mathematics, and technology. This modern elite had the scientific mindset that singled them out for a life of research and engineering. This segment of the population were well adapted to the instruments of technology and developed a source of emotional satisfaction, and the specialization became a way of controlling others. From the first technological class, the governors and heads of institutions were recruited. So, from that particular group, the cybernetists were the ones who were sort of in charge or overseeing the techni group. So if you imagine that today, think about like the major tech conglomerate companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon. You have you already see this happening today with these tech conglomerate giant companies that are monopolizing the economy, especially like companies like Amazon, driving a lot of other companies out of or competing. They're competitors to well-known in-stores like non-technological companies are driven out of the marketplace. But in not what I'm saying, like the figures like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or the founder of Google, those particular people would be considered the cybernetists. They oversee the vast group of people who work for them as technically minded people who are able to understand the technology and to develop new software and algorithms. Um, so um, then there was the group. Then there was everybody else in this world, in this society, the people, or the masses, so to speak. And that's where the deschooling of society movement held that the view of children were unteachable. Think about now and this time of social distancing, where Um, so much of education has now, in the education arena, has shifted towards from in class. This is actually out of necessity because of the coronavirus. From shifted from in class to an online environment. Think about that. This could be the beginning of a shift for many people from in class teaching to perhaps once people get trained with this kind of technology, like using Canvas um, or other forms of technology that serves to you know distance the actual environment of learning from the actual technology that's able to provide it from a distance for remote learning. And number two, the question asks, what will the illiterate and uneducated masses turn to in order to save themselves from brutishness? The technically disadvantaged, less capable citizens were left out from the understanding on using technology, and they were seen as unteachable. Okay, a segment of the population who were not technically advantaged taught themselves to read um, and they adapted great stories and watered down ideas so they could be easily digested by mass culture. Religion varied from piety to mysticism. They turned to religion, poetry, soft sciences, and public debates about eternal questions which bored the technological classes. So, in many ways, the reason why the technological classes like the techni and the cybernetists had no need for the types of educational subjects such as English, for example, or other languages, or poetry, or culture, or religion, even because they found that the technological aspect of being in a technological culture was more readily accessible. In that way, you have the mass culture, the masses, so to speak, the people who are not technologically given towards technological advances would be the ones who preserve the culture that is being ignored or uh, relegated to the masses, so to speak, and they somehow ironically preserve these cultural artifacts that were discarded by the upper echelons of technological society. Okay, so what will replace the nation? Think about the nation as a nation state, which was defined by region and language as the new unit of social organization. The nation state would be replaced by common interest groups and personal privilege granted for a social purpose. Economic prosperity and social economic status superseded linguistic and historical unity. A futuristic society developed where you had a new type of fiefdoms and control over markets, subculture, and pockets of affluence. Think about movies that depict futuristic societies like The Giver or the Handmaid's Tale or the Hunger Games, where you have this kind of futuristic world depicted in a dystopic way, where the where this is actually these kind of things are actually happening in these depicted in these kind of movies that the mass culture, the common people are subject to a more advanced, technologically advanced culture. So the nation state would be replaced by common interest groups and personal privilege. Okay, and so economic insecurities were fixed by a comprehensive welfare system guided by computers. Um, think about the movie Wall-E, for example, the cartoon, in which the robot is his main job is to collect garbage, and that in that famous scene where he finds himself on board the ship where all the humans are living, everybody's grown fat and they're not even aware of their surroundings. They're all plugged into their technological interfaces. So think about the possibility that one of the things that we see now happening is that, and according to Jacques Barazun, because of the technological advances that people would have less exercise, they would tend to be more sedentary, and that the obesity epidemic would become much more prevalent. One of the things I thought was interesting was um, that he says here at one point, the great era ended by coincidence, no doubt, as it had begun with a new world disease, transmitted also like the old through sexual contact. I imagine that there he's talking about a type of makes you think of the AIDS epidemic for one, but it also makes you think about what's happening now with the coronavirus as being transmitted through not just through proximity of other people, but that it's become a pandemic. And now that we are living in this era, the pandemic, that things like social distancing has become part of the way in which we have to interact with other people and create distances so that we remain safe from infection. Um, and so, but intense medical research in due course achieved cure and prevention and contact. But intense medical research in due course achieved in cure and prevention, and the chief killer element was once more heart disease, most often linked to obesity. The control of nature apparently stopped short of self-control. So that kind of suggests that sentence um, that even though in the futuristic society have learned to control nature, so to speak, and much of disease has been eradicated, that we still don't have the ability to control our impulses. So, and that leads us to moral anarchy or um, a kind of or on the one hand, and then on the other hand, maybe um, and so it becomes, he says, in time it became less exacting, and although fraud, corruption, sexual promiscuity, and tyranny at home or in the office did not disappear, these vices having to be concealed attracted only the bold or the reckless, and even they agreed that the veil is a sign not of hypocrisy but of respect for human dignity. Um, the other question is, what will happen to a democratic society, democracies in this type of future? Um, in this transition from bureaucracy to technology, the comprehensive welfare system improved the situation of those provided for since its inception because of a marked efficiency. Therefore, voter turnout was not necessary to elect officials to government positions. Okay, another question is, once it achieved equilibrium and a state of peace within itself, how will Western civilization respond to the violence of the rest of the world? In this question, it's once equilibrium was achieved, there was a way to preserve and continue the equilibrium so that there was no statistical event, because the worker day world was dictated by statistical events on every aspect. So you became a statistic, and you were conforming to your statistical group. Um, this applied to the consumer as well as the parent and the old and the sick. There was no need to strive for creativity because everything seemed to have a predetermined statistical output. Um, Nonetheless, equilibrium was disrupted by a new world disease transmitted through sexual contact, as we mentioned before. So again, what are some of the cultural events and forces that make Jacques Berzon's imagined future possible? Think about the ways in which we live in a technocratic society, where those who are at the helm of society are those in control. They are the scientists who belong to large corporations. They are also the young people in social media, Google, Amazon, Twitter, Facebook, and these are considered utopias in the technological world. One needs to belong to a subset of people with technologically advanced understanding, such as Gates or Jobs or Zuckerberg, to maintain or to manipulate or impact society. Does it seem possible that democracy could be rendered largely obsolete? There is the possibility that that in a democratic society can be impacted or limited due to the need for military action. Let's think about the eras that perhaps you or yourselves are currently living in. We're all living in a the COVID area, but think about the time when there was the post 9/11 era, and then in the 1950s it was the Cold War era. So eras seem to happen and as a result of cataclysmic events, or world wars, or new scientific innovations. Does it seem reasonable to speculate that there will be no more nation states, that is, countries that are regionally defined? What might the world be without them? It can be speculated that the process of globalization will make the nation state, the defining of local boundaries, and the exaltation of race or creed a secondary function of society. All right. And finally, I'll leave you with this thought with this podcast. Think about, have you ever heard the phrase, in the future everyone will be famous for 15 minutes? That was said supposedly by Andy Warhol. And think about, but it was actually coined by the photographer Nat Finkelstein. But Andy Warhol kind of popularized this notion that 15 minutes of fame. Think about the type of culture we live in today, where you have reality TV shows, you have where people crave attention in the media, and how some people want to have their 15 minutes of fame, right? Think how true that is now, and even in the future, how that could be true as well. So this ends this second part of the podcast.